Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the first Nature Towns and Cities Taster webinar focused on urban green infrastructure. I'm Matilda. I'm a project manager for the Nature Towns and Cities programme. It's fantastic to see so many of you on the call today, and we're really excited to be connecting with you. So I'm going to speak for the first few minutes just to outline what you can expect from this session. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the majority of the session will focus on several great examples of working on green infrastructure for people and place from teams working in Nottingham, Camden and Islington, followed by 40 minutes for a Q&A panel discussion. We've had some apologies from Edinburgh City Council who have had an unexpected team illness, so can't be with us, but we'll definitely be working with them in the future. So do join the mailing list to hear more from them. Next slide, please. Next slide, whenever you're ready. Thank you. So there's a few helpful bullet points on the screen about how this session will work. If you have a question to submit to the panel on urban green infrastructure or about anything else you hear today, please use the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentations. We've enabled automatic captioning for today, so if you want to turn these on or off, you can do so in the settings at the bottom of your screen as well. If you've got any trouble with your connection, please check your internet connection and firewall settings, but we're also in the chat and you can ask us questions or for help there. So this session is being recorded and will be available in our website in the coming days. Next slide, please. So we'll be introducing our speakers throughout the day, but to give you an idea of who you'll hear from, this slide shows the range of partners and colleagues speaking today, including leads from Edinburgh City Council, Nottingham City Council, Islington Council and Camden Council, all ably chaired by Claire from Natural England. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we'll be using an interactive whiteboard throughout this webinar and our future webinars. It'll be open in between sessions and shared with other people. So over the next few months, you can continue referring back to it as a bank of resources or for inspiration. It also includes helpful links to things discussed today and helpful information about the programme. To access the whiteboard, please use the link that will be put in the chat and put a message in here if you need any help setting up the tech. If you haven't used Miro before, just one tip to get you started, you'll find some blue post-it notes throughout that will guide you through. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned, this webinar is the first in a series of taster sessions, which will give a flavour of what's to come from the network component of Nature Cities and Towns. Before we dive into talking about urban green infrastructure, I wanted to give a brief overview of the Nature Towns and Cities programme, so you're aware of how it all fits together. Earlier in October, we hosted an introductory webinar on the programme with a deep dive on the grant component specifically, and you can watch that back now on our website if you want more information after this. So Nature Towns and Cities is a wider programme which aims to work with at least 100 towns and cities across the UK to transform access to green space. The programme has people at the heart of it, and the overall goal is about millions more people enjoying time outdoors in their local urban green space. The programme was founded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Natural England and the National Trust, and we're working closely with Nature Scot, Natural Resources Wales and Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and as well as lots more organisations in the future. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are three core components to this programme: a grant, an accreditation scheme and a network. The taster session today is a small part of what you can expect from the network in the future. The network is designed to build confidence, capability and connection, ultimately to support those working on improving access to green space. It's open to everyone and it's free to be a member. Through the network, you'll gain access to knowledge and successful solutions about what's working when it comes to green spaces. It will be a place to connect with other people who are leading for change from a range of fields relevant to towns and cities, including health and well-being, green infrastructure, and green finance. There will be opportunities to collaborate and build new partnerships. It's a space to tap into the collective wisdom of peers and experts from the sector and beyond. You'll be able to take part in and lead events, join cohort learning activities, and access resources. The network will be shaped by all of us, and in collaboration with you, it will grow, iterate, and evolve to best serve those working on urban green spaces. It's an opportunity to be part of something bigger, and ultimately the network will help the programme create a movement for change. So please do sign up to our mailing list and visit the website now to keep up to date with the programme and how you can be involved. So I'm going to hand to our chair for today now, which is Claire Warburton, Deputy Director, Sustainable Development at Natural England. Next slide, please, and over to Claire.
Thank you, Matilda. It's great to be here, and thank you for those brilliant sort of introductory remarks, Matilda. So as Matilda said, I'm Deputy Director for Sustainable Development in Natural England, and I'm going to be chairing the session today. It's really exciting to see nature towns and cities getting underway. And this is part of that series of webinars as part of that network that Matilda's just talked about. This is really here to support the Nature Towns and Cities initiative. And today's session is focused on urban green infrastructure, which is a subject really close to my own heart. Really passionate about seeing nature in towns and cities, really inspiring young people, particularly where nature is close to home, and growing that kind of next generation of people who love and care for nature and who really want to value it. So and particularly actually seeing places where there is poor access to green space, starting to help to address those issues where there is a lack of private garden space, for example. So I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction to what urban green infrastructure is and why it's important. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. So yeah, I think urban green infrastructure it could be anything from your back garden, the streets that you walk to school, to the shops, to work, tree-lined streets. It could be the street you cycle along that is tree-lined. It could be rain gardens. It could be the park, the local park, waterway, river, pond, wetland. Green corridors alongside road or rail verges, green walls, green roofs, green bus stops. It could be any of those things. But I think the important thing about green infrastructure is that it is a connected network. So it's not just those assets on their own. It's a network of connected assets that link both people and wildlife, linking towns, peri-urban areas, rural areas, and recognizing there is that kind of interdependency between towns and cities and the natural capital that surrounds them for some of the sponge-like qualities that those rural areas can provide, absorbing water and helping to reduce flood risk, for example, in towns and cities. So a really important part of green infrastructure is that bigger picture network, and local nature recovery strategies are really looking at how we can do that kind of big picture network piece. But the other big thing about green infrastructure is that it is doing a job, and a colleague of mine once described green infrastructure as nature doing a job, which I thought was a great description. And it's there for healthy and more resilient nature, providing those kind of ecological corridors for local wildlife sites, local nature reserves, for pollinators, for species, for hedgehogs, for so it's that kind of it's for there for nature, but it's also doing this job, and it's providing resources that can help to make places more resilient and adaptable to climate change. So we know trees, for example, can store carbon, but we also know that creating green routes can support active low carbon travel. But we also know green infrastructure can help to reduce temperatures in towns and cities, bring them down by 2 or 3 degrees, and can act in a sponge-like way to reduce the pressure on drainage systems and to reduce local flood risk. My local park in Manchester, that's where I'm based, Mayfield Park, has recently been designed with to be resilient up to a level of 1 to 100 year flood resilience. So we can do this, we can design in flood resilience into local parks and green space. The other job that nature, green space, blue space close to home can do is that it can really be important for health and well-being. And a sort of key statistic is that if everyone was to have access to green space in England, we could save £2.1 billion of funding on health costs each year. So there's a massive role for green and blue infrastructure in terms of those health and well-being benefits, both for physical health and well-being, but also for mental health and well-being. And finally, just that role that it can play in economic growth and prosperity, and providing attractive environments that can attract business investment, both nationally but also internationally, creating places where people, businesses want to invest because they want their workforce to live and be part of an environment that helps to create quality of life. So all really good reasons for green infrastructure. If you go on to the next slide, please, just pulling out really some of the key sort of strands from this around how green infrastructure can help local authorities deliver corporate priorities around planning and transport, net zero and climate, health benefits, as I've already talked about, but also things like management efficiencies, reducing mowing regimes in order to enhance biodiversity on road verges, rewilding parks, and also how taking a strategic approach to green infrastructure, and I think we're going to hear more about this later today, to help develop a pipeline of investable projects that can attract public, private and philanthropic funding. So if you go on to the next slide, please, just going to finally signpost to some resources that Natural England has developed through the Green Infrastructure Framework, which gives some backbone kind of principles of what good green infrastructure looks like in terms of the why, the what and the how of good green infrastructure, but also then some standards around, well, how much is enough, and the green infrastructure standards, particularly things like the accessible green space standards and the urban greening factor standard, can really help local authorities, local planning authorities to set the quantum of green infrastructure that they want in planning, and also within retrofit within their local environments. We've also produced a mapping database, green infrastructure planning and design guide, which is great for local design codes and process journeys as well. So all of that is a bit of a resource. But really, I'm going to hand over now to some of the practitioners who are really putting this into practice and who have learned so much from the Future Parks Accelerator programme that has been the sort of predecessor to this piece of work, this initiative around nature towns and cities. So we're going to hear from practitioners who are actually doing this stuff. And I'm going to hand over to Eddie and to Claire, so from Nottingham City Council. So Eddie Curry is the head of green space and natural environment at Nottingham City Council, and Claire Smith-Harris is the green space strategy and inward investment manager. So over to you, Eddie and Claire.
Thank you, Claire. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk to you today about our new green space strategy, which is called Greener, Healthier, Happier, and also some of our new urban greening projects that are really helping us to embed the strategy into real life projects within the city. Just to get us started, Claire will take you through some of the strategic priorities, and then I'll talk you through one of the major projects that we've had in the centre of the city of Nottingham. So if I can just hand over to Claire, and then I'll come back to you later on.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks, Claire. Okay, our Nottingham presentation, as Eddie's described, focuses on two key areas. I'm going to talk about our Future Parks Accelerator journey, our key areas of focus, what we achieved, and most importantly, the programme's wider impact. Eddie's going to talk about how this work has informed our capital programme, what can be seen and experienced here in Nottingham with a significant new city park, and the journey we took in making this vision a reality. Next slide, please. One of the key outputs of the Future Parks Accelerator funding was to provide Nottingham City Council the capacity and headspace to create a new green space strategy that needed to respond to multiple factors, such as the climate and ecological crisis, and with the emergence of biodiversity net gain, a greater need to manage our assets for nature and for people. Throughout its lifetime, the previous green space strategy delivered a high standard of good quality parks in Nottingham, resulting in multiple Green Flag awards that the team are super proud of. However, our new strategy needed to work harder. It needed to cover more, and it needed to take into consideration multiple agendas, considering all green space touchpoints, such as highways, economic regeneration, planning, public health, and active travel, amongst others. We recognised what we needed was a green infrastructure strategy. So we used, as Claire's just referred to earlier, Natural England's Green Infrastructure Principles as a tried and trusted framework to base our ambitions on. Next slide, please. The key elements of what we covered gave us a better understanding of true stakeholder engagement with multiple stakeholders using innovative techniques, particularly online as COVID hit the programme midway through. Our assets, crucially their natural capital value, helping us to quantify their ecosystem benefits. Who else could we work with, both inside and outside the sector, moving past the usual suspects? And how could we leverage support from funders, in particularly through green finance? Next slide, please. This slide gives a slide on a page flavour of the breadth and depth of the work that we cover and some of the accolades that we hold. Information covers physical assets as well as social benefits. Natural capital value is really helpful to bring the service to life for wider stakeholders and partners, and most importantly, to leverage additional funding. Next slide, please. This is our strategy bullet that came out of all of the stakeholder engagement that we undertook. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's greener, healthier, and happier Nottingham. We have 4 strategic themes, those being greener connected neighbourhoods, resilient climate positive spaces, an activated healthy sustainable city, and creating nature-rich beautiful spaces for people. And you'll see that the values that we hold at the core of all the work that we do are around the outside of that strategy bullet, and they are aligned with all of the 4 strategic themes. Next slide, please. So greener connected neighbourhoods. This map shows where our green space lies, mapped against those areas that would benefit most from access, which helps us to understand where to prioritise, absolutely essential in these cash-strapped times. Our total public green-blue space coverage, and again, we use the urban greening factor, another Natural England design device, to help us set a clear and present target to maintain and grow our green space, benefiting people, nature, and wildlife. Next slide, please. Resilient climate positive places recognises the impact for climate and biodiversity that green space has in a densely populated urban city. In addition, biodiversity net gain will support us to deliver more greening initiatives through nature-friendly developments in the future. Next slide, please. An activated, healthy, sustainable city. The benefit of access to green space for people and their mental health and physical health is well documented. Partnership working in the health and voluntary sectors, as well as sharing ownership through activation, creates a real sense of value and pride in local places. Next slide, please. Creating nature-rich, beautiful spaces for people, you'll see from the pictures. This is not just about what we look after, but who we involve and how we design our spaces to make them up-to-date, relevant, and future-proof. An active volunteering programme, Green Guardians, is in support of everyone benefiting from all the positive value that green spaces provide. Next slide, please. So what's next for us? I'm delighted to say that tomorrow we take this strategy to our executive board, and we're very hopeful that we will get applause, that we will be adopted, and we'll be able to completely implement the strategy from here on in. We'd like to continue to work with National Lottery Heritage Fund and the National Trust and Natural England to develop our biodiversity initiatives. And we intend to maintain and increase a gearing ratio. In other words, how much money we're bringing into our service in relation to every pound that we spend, which will aid our budget constraints through further inward investment. We're looking forward to further developing biodiversity net gain and taking a whole council approach to how we produce that. And then our contribution to the local nature recovery strategy is first and foremost across Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, and embedding greener, healthier, happier within the local nature recovery strategy is a key priority. I'm going to pass over to Eddie to talk more about the Green Heart.
Thank you, Claire. Can we have the next slide, please? So now I'd just like to take you through one of our major projects that's really helping to completely regenerate our city centre, and it's been a project which has been long in the making, but certainly one now that is really starting to transform the way the city looks. Next slide. So going back as little as 2018-19, your arrival in Nottingham as you come out of the train station would have been greeted by this fantastic facade. You know, once you've navigated the 4 lanes of traffic, you then enter the city via 2 sliding doors of very unpleasant and very unimaginative sort of frontage or backside of an old 1960s shopping centre called the Broadmarsh. When we got to you know, early sort of 2000s, so the then sort of owners of the shopping centre started a regeneration project, and then went into liquidation as we went into the COVID period, and completely abandoned the centre back to the landowner, which was the council, and that created a huge pressure for us. Next slide. So this again is just another picture of that 4-lane traffic zone and the entrance to the Broadmarsh. Very hard, very sort of, you know, harsh landscape, no greening at all, lots of traffic, lots of pollution, old shopping car park, and just generally a very unpleasant and unwelcoming entrance to the city. Next slide. So when Broadmarsh went into liquidation, the council was faced with quite a huge sort of dilemma. There was no doubt about it that politically it was incredibly sensitive, and literally thousands of people were called into the council or making comments on the Facebook page or negative press releases about, you know, what we're going to do with this old shopping centre, which the council has now adopted midway through construction. And I have to say, the shopping centre was so far into its redevelopment that it was literally just a frame and resembled a bomb site. So it was very politically sensitive, but the council soon recognised that we couldn't do nothing. And one of the things that was coming loud and clear from the very early days of the consultation was that people wanted to see some more greening in the centre of the city. So the council engaged a consultancy, Thomas Hardwick Design, Heathwick Design Consultancy, to help master plan the entire site. And as you can see on this drawing here, I think item 3 is the Green Heart, right in the centre of the development. Item 5 is the superhighway that I just showed you earlier on in the last slide, sort of removing all the traffic from the centre of the town, and then coming up with some creative ideas about how we use the old frame of the shopping centre. Because it's got a lot of retained carbon in the concrete, there was a big desire to try and keep as much of the frame on site rather than demolishing and releasing those carbon, you know, into the atmosphere. But equally, how we can then connect to the sort of west of the site back towards the castle and the green spaces around that. You know, it's all been viewed as one big master plan with a whole mixture of sort of retail and housing developments, which will come over the next 10 years. Next slide. Just as we started on that journey, one of the first things for us to consider was just how we manage the traffic management around the city centre. You know, clearly there was a circulation that went what was called Collins Street and back along Canal Street, but the whole city centre sort of traffic management had to be completely redirected in order to enable us to sort of pedestrianise and really consider how we could then sort of work on our green credentials moving forward. I think one of the big catalysts for this green initiative was the development of the new bus station and car park, which you can see straight in the middle of the slide. That includes a brand new central library, but there was some delays due to COVID when that project was being developed, from when we demolished the old car park to developing the new one. And actually, during that period when the site had been demolished, there was a huge outcry for, can this not just be a new green space rather than building another car park on it? But those plans were far too advanced not to be implemented. But the messages that came from that development very much led into the consultation around the new, what we could do with the Broadmarsh and how we could move things forward. So in the big catalyst was not just the road developments, but the council managed to attract about £161 million worth of Transforming Cities funds, which again was mainly used for some traffic management and sort of realignment of the traffic, but also has helped us to regenerate the Broadmarsh Centre and help fund the Green Heart, and also a whole series of urban greening down Collins Street towards the right-hand side of the slide near the college. There's a whole raft of new green spaces that have appeared along those spaces, and again along Canal Street along the bottom. All of it has now been sort of greened and pedestrianised in a way which we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. Next slide. Right at the heart of some of our thinking, and alongside the strategy development, was just some thoughts about how we can link up and make the best use of our urban green spaces and our blue spaces. The canal runs just south of the Broadmarsh, and also a number of green corridors that run both to the south and linking towards the river and connecting towards some of our other major green spaces alongside the river and to the sort of east of the city. But also via the canal, we can get from the Broadmarsh straight to another development site, which is called the Island Quarter, which again is a huge development which is currently under construction at the moment, and the whole green space principles will flow into that space as our next major project. Next slide. So as part of the Thomas Heatherwick design of the master plan, the council then engaged Townsend landscape architects, and Townsend were a very trusted and well experienced landscape architect practice who've done lots of great work nationally, particularly around biodiversity and sort of beautifying sort of urban landscapes. But we worked with them to create a vision of which we could then start to have a big conversation with our community. The picture just shows you some of the proposals for the Green Heart, but also how the frame of the old Broadmarsh shopping centre could be retained in some form to create a really interesting urban landscape, which new developments can pop up around as we move into the future. We certainly thought very hard about how we could develop that partnership. The conversation we had with our citizens was vast, one of the biggest consultations the council's ever really had, and the messages that came back with it were very clear that people wanted to see this being a very sustainable, very green, very biodiverse and very active space. And actually, as part of the £161 million Transforming Cities Fund, about 24 million of that was used to drive forward the greening of not just the Green Heart, but all those streets around Collins Street, Sussex Street, and Carrington Street, which are all abut and lead up to the Green Heart. Next slide. So when we've been through the big consultation and the big discussion, we then started to formulate a real tight brief for the actual new project. And we wanted to create a place that was very much about Nottingham, a place that was iconic, a place that had a rich source of inspiration, and how we could develop a distinctive and characterful public realm spaces. It was very much a clear ambition, that included a number of key factors. Next slide. One of the key consultation factors was really about how we could put the marsh back in the Broadmarsh, how we could really sort of look to try and develop, the urban greening and blue-green spaces around the city back to what they were historically. The Castle, Canal Street, the River Trent used to run, right up, not River Trent, but one of the other tributary rivers in the city, which has now disappeared, used to run right alongside where the Broadmarsh is. And actually putting some water back into the space has become a real priority for the project. Next slide. But equally, how we created a network of connecting landscapes, which really helped to build our biodiversity and wildlife sort of corridors throughout the city centre. Over the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a real urban sort of design sort of principle around almost greying up spaces so they become sterile and have no real life. Whereas, we've now completely sort of transformed that whole agenda now, where everybody in our planning teams and regeneration teams are seeing the benefit of how we can connect our green spaces for both wildlife, and next slide, and also how those spaces can be used to connect and help people move around the city in a more sort of enjoyable space, and how those spaces can be sort of activated and used to bring people into the city more, so that people can enjoy a day out in the city in a way which is more relaxing and more beneficial to their health and well-being. Next slide. So this is the glorious Broadmarsh. You can see there the view, having demolished that great frontage that I talked about earlier on. This is the space that now occupies the Green Heart, but as you can see, there's still work to be done. This lovely brutalist piece of concrete at the bottom of Collins Street is probably one of the next big projects for the council to consider, and how that structure can be removed in time so that they can connect the Broadmarsh right through to the castle grounds, which you can see beyond, is going to be a real opportunity. But equally, the space where the diggers are, that's probably the food court of the old Broadmarsh, and then just the space beyond is what was British Home Stores many years ago, but now is laid some space available for some new housing developments and the Green Heart in the centre. Next slide. So just developing the brief further, we very much focused our attention on how we could just create places that are great for people and wildlife, a place to experience seasonal changes, and really just to explore nature on your doorstep. Next slide. Part of the brief was all about creating climate adaptive and wildlife friendly planting spaces, but also how we embed biodiversity net gain and really seek to develop a partnership with the Wildlife Trust, not just to deliver the 10% net gain, but to exceed it, and to find a way in which we can maximise the opportunity. And actually, the scheme has really looked to provide increased tree species diversity for climate and also more disease resilient planting schemes. Next slide. So this is just an aerial photograph with the Green Heart slap bang in the middle of it. So the space that I showed you in the slide before with the diggers and the car park to the left, the Green Heart runs right the way through the middle of the centre, and then the area on the right hand side is still the remains of the old Broadmarsh shopping centre, and that again will be the next part of the journey. Those areas to the left and right will also be developed in a way which expands the Green Heart with greening and urban sort of greening opportunities throughout the developments that will come over the next 10 years. Next slide. And finally, as part of the brief, we were very fortunate to have got a real experienced design team on board, and actually their experience in developing planting schemes which are truly transformational and really capture the imagination of our communities has been a real opportunity. So developing perennial super blooms and really bright and colourful mixtures of contemporary planting, which really help to sort of maximise the pride and ownership in the space in many respects, and really capture the imagination, has been all part of our brief moving forward. So just moving on to the next slide, which brings us right up to today. The Broadmarsh has been developed. We've put a big shroud around the old frame just not to detract from the great new green space, and the development of the next stage of the Broadmarsh frame will come over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. But we've actually put a marsh back into the Broadmarsh. We've created a big urban drainage scheme which has a big body of water within it, and also a sud system that flows off the footpaths and sort of pedestrian areas that run around it, and that's all connected with a whole mixture of native and wildflower planting areas and some formal areas that people can use for recreation and relaxing, but all alongside the natural features. Next slide. Again, that just goes right way through the scheme now. So, you know, the scheme is being developed in a way which has multiple sort of footpath options. There's a main sort of right of way that runs through the middle of the sort of park, and that kind of follows loosely the original line that ran through the Broadmoor shopping centre as you came into the city. So it's a very different experience now as you come into the city centre. Next slide. And that just explains it. One of the other key factors of the brief was to try and utilise natural stone materials as well as sort of natural planting, and actually using some of the natural sort of sandstone, which is a big feature of Nottingham. The caves and the sandstone sort of rock outcrops in the city have featured very heavily within the design of the scheme to make it really feel like a Nottingham sort of scheme and very unique to our environment. And then finally, my last slide. Next slide, please. We had the big opening ceremony just a couple of weeks ago. Just all the we had the East Midlands Mayor there, our Chief Exec, and you know the portfolio holders, and a great deal of people from the community who all have really enjoyed exploring the new green spaces. And actually, what we're finding, you know, already, you know, within the space is that people love just sitting around and enjoying the open spaces in a way which, you know, people could never imagine sort of 5 or 6 years ago. Next slide. So just thinking about the future, obviously developing a green space is just part of the journey, part of the story, and obviously the challenges that the council in Nottingham is facing financially have been a real constraint in terms of how we creatively find ways to maintain and look after these spaces moving forward. But equally, you know, we thought very hard about how we could maximise the first couple of years of the landscape maintenance period by creating an establishment period which still enabled us to use our existing funding to maintain the space for up to 3 years. And we're now actively talking to Homes England about a potential sort of land transfer of some of the building sites that sit around the frame and to the left of the site, so that they can take on the management and development of those spaces over the next 5 years. And we're in talks with Homes England equally about how that could then open up some funding from Homes England to maintain the Green Heart as a real catalyst to those developments. Now, very much thinking back about the whole start with a park philosophy. The park's already built. The development of the frame will take another 5 to 10 years, but actually we've got the partners and the conversations taking place very productively that will enable us to secure funding for another 5 years post the initial 3 years to actually sort of maintain the space. And it's very much hoped that after that sort of 8-year period, the developments would have started to come on board. And actually the general philosophy that we're working on is that we'll start to consider how we can charge levies to those housing developments and retail units for, you know, to secure funding to enable the site to be maintained into the future. But I think finally, one of the big strands of work, as I mentioned, the space has already become just completely sort of activated by the local community. We have lots of people asking for volunteer opportunities on the space, and equally, you know, people just love hanging out on the space, you know, and enjoying the wildlife, which is just a transformation from the rat run that he used to run through the middle of the shopping centre 10 years ago, and it's just created a very different environment, and an environment that people are keen to replicate. As I mentioned earlier, we will be looking to just continue to green some of our urban streets, link us up to the next development at the Island site, and equally, you know, through some of our other initiatives like the Streets for People schemes, we've already started to do some more tree planting and urban greening around our urban core as well. But that's all part of the delivery of our new strategy. And that is the next slide.
Thanks, Eddie. I think we're going to, oh, there we are. Excellent.
There we are.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. That is so inspiring. Just to hear how that project has been catalysed, how you've had that ambition and really seeing things that you couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. I loved it, absolutely loved it, and loved the Nottingham nests as well. That's absolutely great. So thank you so much. We are going to move on because we have another really interesting case study for you. So I'm going to introduce Camden and Islington to you now. So we've got Maddie Gunn and Joe Lewis, who are going to talk about their Highways Greening Accelerator. So Maddie is the Greening the Public Realm Programme Manager for Islington, and Joe is the Green Space Development Manager for Camden. So over to you guys.
Great, thank you, Claire. So the Camden Islington Highways Greening Accelerator. This was a partnership project between Islington and Camden that has been running for the last couple of years. It's funded through the Future Parks Accelerator and was a successor to our Parks for Health work that some of you might be familiar with, which was a previous partnership project between Camden and Islington, where we looked at health impacts of parks. This was also funded through the FPA. But the Highways Greening Accelerator, we decided to kind of focus just on highways greening for this piece of work. So if you go into the next slide, please. So the programme set out to explore creative and innovative ways of converting grey to green. So that's using highways land to provide access to nature in both Camden and Islington. You might be thinking, why highways? Why have we focused on looking at highways in particular for new green space? This is the biggest opportunity to provide new green spaces in both Islington and Camden. Just taking Islington as an example, we are the most dense London borough in terms of population, and we also have the second least amount of public open space per person in the UK. And Camden has quite similar statistics to that as well. Neither Camden or Islington have large amounts of free space to create new large parks or very large new green spaces, but both boroughs have a real aspiration to start to develop creating more new green space within the boroughs. So we know that greening the boroughs are going to have to utilise the existing public realm that we already have. And for us, the majority of space that we have in the public realm is on streets and highways. We also know that street-based greening schemes have multiple benefits. Lots of people have talked about this already today, but greening the public realm includes things like increasing social value, providing more access to nature, biodiversity benefits, surface water flood risk management, and also mitigating the urban heat island effect, especially on streets where the tarmac can get very hot in the summer months. So what did we aim to do through the project? So our overall aim was to improve both the quantity and the quality of new green infrastructure delivered in the boroughs, as well as helping us to create a collaborative, cross-departmental working culture where urban greening is celebrated in Camden and Islington. A major part of the project, which I'll talk you through in a moment, involved learning and skills development with our officers in both boroughs. And that's a wide range of officers who are involved with greening projects. What we found is that although both Islington and Camden have green space teams, actually there are people from across the council that get involved in the design and the delivery of new green spaces. So we wanted to engage kind of across the board. We also looked at ways to ensure that the investment in highways greening is effective, efficient, and contributes to reducing inequalities by targeting the areas of greatest need, whilst also helping us to support vital ecosystem services in the boroughs. Next slide, please.
Hi, thanks, Maddie. Yeah, so I guess it's just, this slide is to flag that, you know, we have been delivering green infrastructure in the borough for several years, predating this project. That was at a range of different scales, both in Camden and Islington, some of which was temporary, as you can see the pocket park that's on the top left, and then some of it more kind of permanent interventions and street trees and things that of a kind of a higher complexity, higher budget. One of the reflections on the project work that we had done to date was that some of the projects were really successful and were kind of taking full advantage of the opportunity, and others less so. And that was partly down to the way that the handover was done, partly down to the way that design was resolved, and sometimes just down to a lack of expertise that was input at the right stage of the project. So I think taking on all of this on board, we were just in a position where we were kind of on the right track, but perhaps just needed to recenter ourselves and learn from some of the projects that we'd done previously. And that was really where the Highways Greening Accelerator came from, is just kind of refocusing our ambition and making sure that we were able to deliver green infrastructure to the best standard possible. That's it. Thanks. Next slide, please.
Thanks. So in terms of what we did through the accelerator, as I mentioned previously, a big part of this was the training program. So we knew that there was a need to kind of improve knowledge and skills development around designing and delivering green infrastructure in the boroughs. To start off with our training program, we did an initial assessment of officers' skills, knowledge and experience in delivering green infrastructure, as we wanted to make sure that the training addressed areas of needs and also skills gaps within the two organisations. And we were really focusing on transport and highways officers first and foremost, because of the nature of the projects on highways. But as I mentioned, we did reach out to colleagues kind of across departments who were involved in the design and maintenance of green space. So once we'd done our initial assessment of sort of understanding what sorts of skills might be needed, then we designed our curriculum around that, and we worked with Urban Design London as a delivery partner for this project. The training programme consisted of both in-person site visits to projects across London, as well as online webinar style sessions. And we made sure to make use of speakers who were real experts in their field. We also, working with UDL was also really helpful, I think because they have a really good understanding of a local authority audience, and we're very good at sort of understanding the needs of local authority officers as well. So some of the topics that we looked at and did training around were SUDs, hard materials, planting, ecology, engagement, and different delivery processes and vehicles for delivering new green space. Through the training programme, we also had a regular space for kind of open questions and networking, so the officers between these two boroughs had a sort of non-judgmental open space to have discussions, talk about shared challenges, talk about shared opportunities, and really to provide a forum for sort of peer-to-peer learning as well. The sessions were all recorded, the ones that were online, but really the main legacy in terms of the training programme once our sort of official events had ended was the development of some guidance documents. So I'll talk you through those. If we go on to the next slide, please. Thanks. So these three documents that you can see on screen, the first two of them came sort of more directly out of the training programme itself, and the best practice and lessons learnt document on the right-hand side was a slightly separate commission, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the Green Infrastructure for Streets, a practical guide to design, delivery and maintenance is really a compendium of all of the information that we covered during the training programme that we put together into a sort of very digestible format as an output of the training programme itself. We also developed a planting design guide and then a suite of case studies as well. So if you go on to the next slide, please. And the link to the where all of the documents are is about to come up, hopefully in the chat. So they are all available online and can be accessed. So in terms of the practical delivery guide, as I said, this came directly out of the training programme itself. And this was really aimed at an officer audience. So people who are charged with either preparing policies or designing, delivering and maintaining new and existing green streets and spaces within boroughs. This covers practical guidance on designing green and climate resilient streets. So including things like SUDs and drainage, detailing and materials, planting and ecology. Within this guidance, there's a whole host of officer checklists, so kind of things to think about when you might be designing a scheme, things to make sure that you've done, for example. And it's designed to be really easily understandable. So we have lots of diagrams, lots of illustrations, and is designed as a resource, not just for sort of Camden and Islington, but for local authority officers elsewhere as well to be able to pick up and have a look at and hopefully find useful too. Next slide, please. Then similarly, the planting design guide. So we developed this in association with LDA Design. And this is practical guidance that provides key considerations for developing planting specifications, specifically for small-scale planting schemes that are designed and delivered as part of local highways or street improvement projects. Oh, sorry, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. The focus here was on an ecological approach to planting that is robust for these types of small-scale highways schemes. And we looked at things developing a sort of a palette of climate resilient and drought tolerant planting. We also developed a planting specification that is standardized between the two boroughs, but we designed it so that it could be adapted to each borough's local needs. And that has a set of different typologies with species. So looking at things like plants that are good for rain gardens or tree pit planting. It's aimed at a non-expert audience, but doesn't replace the need for kind of expert guidance too as well. But we really designed this to sort of help officers, particularly again in sort of transport and highways teams, to help them to sort of understand what sorts of planting design would work in these sorts of projects with a limited amount of maintenance as well. Next slide, please. And then finally, so this was our document that looked at best practice and lessons learned for highways greening. So this was a slightly separate commission, which was around cross-authority learning, so sort of learning from elsewhere and bringing those lessons back. So within this, we've got 14 case studies of different highways greening projects from London, the UK, but also around the world. And this was really about sort of inspiring and showing people the art of what's possible. So this, as I said, yes, was to highlight best practice in the planning, design, delivery, management and maintenance of green infrastructure. I think this is sort of aimed at a slightly broader audience than some of the more sort of technical documents that we produced as part of the training program. This is something that anyone can kind of pick up and hopefully be inspired by the projects that are in there. Next slide, please.
Great, thanks. And this was a bit of work that we did right at the end of the project, and it was really to reflect on what was, 2 years worth of learning and conversations and workshops and discussions across all levels of the organisations. And it was really to say, okay, well, now we've learned all of this, what do we need to do as organisations or authorities to really scale up our ambitions to deliver green infrastructure in a way that's going to have a meaningful impact, and do it in a way that means that we'll be making the best of the opportunity and the resources that we've got for delivering this work. So we kind of themed it around 3 key themes, which I'll move on to after this slide. But I think the main principle of it was, after you've done all of that kind of tactical stuff around planting and the type of sub-intervention that you might do and distances and all this very specific information, to be able to just go, okay, well, what are the key things that need to change? And there were some really practical suggestions with that, as well as some more kind of longer term strategic changes. One of the examples at Camden's end was about having a dedicated officer that's responsible for overseeing and onboarding new highways greening as and when it comes forward. And as a result of the recommendation in this document, we were able to secure resource for an additional officer to come in. So they're in the process of being recruited at the moment. And I guess it's just to underline, the value of having learning kind of documented and presented in a way, sometimes from a kind of external body. So this was produced by UDL, but an expert saying, this is something that you need to think about as organizations. If you're going to do this differently, then, changes do need to take place. And I think that's the kind of the value of the accelerator way of delivering work. Is it's not just business as usual, albeit about trying to embed new ways of doing things. Is that, there are some instances where changes are going to have to be made if this is going to be done seriously. Thanks. So, next slide. So we divided it up into these kind of 3 headline sections. So it was around process, resources and funding. And I think on the process, the kind of key message was really that you need, strong political leadership to kind of push for this stuff. And that also requires not just political leadership, but also leadership from within the organisation. So senior officers pulling in the same direction. especially when you're talking about reallocating resources. That was something that we found was incredibly valuable with this project, is that we had buy-in from the kind of very top of the organisation, both at Camden and Islington, which enabled lots of things to happen around it, including, you know, some reallocation of resources. And I think one of the other thing more to do with kind of human resources really, but it's about, you know, what are the skills and expertise that you need to bring into projects as and when they come forward. So obviously, you know, you've got a range of different projects, from fairly simple bits of kind of individual street trees and green infrastructure to major kind of long-term transformation over maybe like a 5 or 10 year period. And each of those will require different levels of expertise, but having a process in place so that you can review and discuss, you know, what the expertise are that are relevant to that project, and making sure that that's factored in from the beginning. I think one of the learnings that we had from projects that have been built was that sometimes, you know, things have gone so far down the line to a point where, you know, if you're bringing in expertise, it's almost too late for that kind of recommendation or design change to be factored in without having to incur kind of abortive costs. And obviously everybody's operating in a constrained budget environment, so just making sure that you're creating a process so that projects can have that feed in of the right expertise at the right time. And then leading on to funding, making sure that you've got proper kind of capital pipeline and delivery program in place, and making sure that this type of work is prioritized. And there's, you know, a lot to be said about tapping into the multiple funding sources that are available. Sometimes that will be council capital, sometimes external, but ultimately pooling those together in the best way possible is really, you know, a big part of unlocking the opportunity. And obviously, last but not least, maintenance funding. All of this stuff is, you know, it's new green space that needs to have a budget allocated to look after it. And it's a bit of an elephant in the room in the discussion. And one of the things we've been lucky enough to secure at both Camden and Islington is a small maintenance uplift for maintaining new green space. So it's not just carving up existing budgets. It's about having that kind of tie into the political leadership to say, this is something we're very committed to looking after in the long term, and albeit a small uplift, that is, you know, a priority for our organisation. So we're going to pay for that. Okay, next slide, thanks. So next steps, we are now at the end of the project. So we're talking about how to, you know, use the recommendations within our organisation. So key thing is about supporting the existing projects that we've got going on. Because it's talking about transport and highways work primarily, it's really linking into the existing transport and highways agenda. You know, mostly that funding is about modal shift. It's not often you have huge pots of money available for either climate resilience work or about placemaking as such. So it's a case of looking at the relevant projects and trying to embed this learning kind of across the piece within Camden. And I think both at Camden and Islington, we're just kind of at the beginning stages of that. And the reference that I made at the beginning about having a dedicated role is that you can really start to kind of, yeah, make sure that the guidance is picked up at different parts in the process, and not just something that is a historic, you know, externally funded project, but is actually just day to day and part of our business as usual. Supporting officers, so making sure that there's an ongoing learning and continuing professional development offer. So it's not just something that happens in isolation, that there's an ongoing commitment to making sure people have the skills and the knowledge that they need to do this to the best standard. And then also following that up with a strategy and policy. So, you know, what are the organisations committing to? Is it a case of getting an effective green infrastructure strategy? Is it a case of getting better tools and data? And one of the bits of work that we didn't have time to go into today is we did a bit of borough specific mapping and really honing in on, you know, how do you deliver green space in the parts of the borough, or, you know, within your administrative boundary where it's going to have the greatest impact. So that's where we are in the project. So, you know, very much the end of the funded project, but the beginning of the journey of how we're, you know, going to embed this in our organisations going forward. Thanks, that's the end.
Thank you, Joe and Maddie. That was absolutely brilliant, and a really nice sort of contrasting sort of example of how you can incorporate green infrastructure into an area that is really sort of tight for space. So looking at those highways opportunities, and I've got lots of questions in my mind around how you worked with the highways authorities to do that, because we might come on to that a little bit later. Having spent many years working with national highways around their sort of national highway network, really interested in how you worked with the highways authority. Absolutely brilliant, and some really great sort of lessons learned as well around sort of that strong political leadership. And again, I'm going to come back and ask you some questions around that, I think, in a bit. We are now moving into question and answer time, and I noticed that the Q&A has been sort of really busy with questions for Eddie and Claire, and also some coming up for you two as well, for Maddie and Joe. So I'm going to come first to some questions around funding, because funding is always the big question on everyone's mind, isn't it? Around, first of all, how do you secure funding for the capital investment in green infrastructure, but also perhaps more tricky is that kind of long-term maintenance funding that is always especially challenging. So I suppose I was going to come to each of you, but perhaps to Claire and Eddie first, in terms of what have you learnt through the process of the Nottingham Broadmarsh examples, the strategy? How has having a GI strategy, for example, helped with that?
Hi, Claire. I think it's just really important to recognise that, you know, when starting out on these journeys of greening, there's got to be an end game to it. There's got to be a resource available to maintain the assets moving forward. Else it all just becomes completely pointless, you know, and it just, the public just see the landscape go downhill and just become full of weeds, which in itself isn't a bad thing from a biodiversity perspective, but actually it's not quite meeting the expectations of some of our citizens. So we work very hard on the sort of exit strategy to try and secure, sort of external funds from the start. But equally, when it comes to capital, the city's got a very strong sort of reputation for securing, government grants or, sort of, regeneration funding or sort of local landfill tax monies and all the rest of it. So I think having a clear plan enables us to really sort of help secure some of those sort of funds. Having a clear understanding of what we're going to use the money for and what the benefits are sort of really enables us to access capital funding quite easily. But I think one of the big aspects around our strategy and how we've embedded that into the thinking of other departments is that actually other people are buying into the framework. We're working very closely with our planners and our regeneration teams in a way that we've never really done so in the past. And I think, that partnership approach and getting everybody onto the same page, sharing the same ambition, has been a real sort of journey of learning, really, but one that is really starting to show some fruit.
Do you want to add anything to that, Claire? Or, I mean, that relationship with Homes England sounds really interesting, and the sort of the business potential business levy also sounds quite interesting and innovative. It sounds like your early days with that.
Yeah, I mean, the levy is completely unique for us, really, in many respects, and just very much part and parcel of, but very much part of the early thinking. We're mindful that those developments are going to take some time to come on board, which is why we've had to max out on the potential extension of the maintenance period or the establishment period, and then also then a bit of a bridging loan from Homes England to get us to the point of when those developments come online in future years. But actually when those developments start to be negotiated, the levy will be part of that discussion.
Yeah, and that's one of the principles I think that's been applied at other places like Mayfield Park that I mentioned earlier, which, the green space really providing the kind of the context for creating an attractive place that can then bring in an additional sort of levy because of that sort of that attractive environment. Interesting. Claire, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, going back to the funding, that that was a transport fund. First and foremost, it was a significant transport fund, and we had some incredibly strong and creative fund and bid writers within the City Council that were able to create what is fundamentally a green space out of that fund and make that look really attractive, and use the framework that we've talked about in terms of the greener connected neighbourhoods, with an aspiration, as Eddie's quite rightly said, about what the future focus should be. So it is about being joined up, it is about having good comms, it's about having clear aspirations, and yeah, being brave, I think.
Thank you. And Joe and Maddie, I know you talked about a maintenance uplift. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but also you are also working with highways quite significantly. I don't know if that has been a source of funding for you.
Yeah, Camden's end, definitely. I mean, I think because we're within London, there's significant pots of money that are available to London boroughs via TfL. So they are the kind of principal funder of kind of transport related projects in London. They issue capital on a 3-year cycle. And I think what we've been kind of seizing as an opportunity is that, kind of looking at that funding in a kind of a broader set of objectives than just about delivering transport. And that's not a TfL objective currently, but it's something that, within our own transport strategy and our own policies at Camden, we're saying, okay, well, transport's obviously very important, but greening the public realm and climate resilient streets is also very important. So then using some of that TfL funding to achieve kind of multiple benefits, things beyond what the kind of typical, transport priorities might be. I think the other thing to mention as well is that, within central London, land value is high, and when there's developments that come forward, we do get a significant amount of Section 106 contributions which come towards the council that can then be kind of combined and pooled together to deliver particular schemes. I think one of the flagship projects we delivered at Camden recently is the West End project, and that was made up of a combination of TfL funding, some Section 106, and actually some capital from the Business Improvement District that kind of brought into the vision of what we were trying to achieve there. So I guess the kind of the headline of that would just be pool the money in in the areas where you're able to achieve the most significant benefits, and I think most people will see the opportunity that presents. I think that's something that's worked for us recently. I don't know if you want to add to that, Maddie.
Yeah, thanks. I think we're the boroughs are quite similar in that regard. I could just speak to the maintenance point as well, because that was the other part of your question, Claire. I mean, it is the challenge that we don't have the answer to, unfortunately. At Islington, we can't use our capital budgets to fund maintenance because it's revenue funding. And yeah, it is a challenge. We have high aspirations to create lots of new green spaces, but at the moment we don't have an answer to how we kind of continually manage and maintain those sort of into the future. One thing that we've been doing at Islington is sort of exploring a pilot for community-led management of some spaces. I wouldn't say that's a panacea for all of the new green spaces that we're putting in, but we have had some success with smaller schemes, often where they're community led, or communities have sort of got together and said that they want to see, some greening on their street, for example. We have some nice examples of where residents have sort of adopted a space and are now maintaining it. So I think there probably is something around that stewardship angle for maintenance, especially when we're talking about the smaller spaces on streets. We've also found that sort of community-led maintenance is more successful when it's connected to an anchor institution. So, for example, a community centre or a doctor's surgery or a school. And actually that links in quite nicely with a lot of the transport projects that we're delivering, which are often linked to livable neighbourhoods or school streets. So we already have engagement with a school or with local people on the sort of the transport projects, but we're delivering green space as part of that as well. So that's sort of one avenue that we started to look down. I think there's also around maintenance, there's something around and again, this is not a solution to the bills necessarily, but making sure that the things that we're putting into the public realm are quite low maintenance. And I think we've both talked about like drought resistant planting, for example, or choosing species that are able to adapt to a warming climate is going to be very important in the future as well. So it's a slightly different aspect of maintenance, but it's still something that we need to think about now, basically, in order to make sure that our green spaces are delivering as much as they can in the future as well.
Thank you. And I suppose linked to that is, you both mentioned there sort of the importance of having a vision, the importance of having a strategy that sort of set that kind of wider ambition. And I just wonder if you can each say a little bit more about how important that has been in terms of bringing senior leaders on board, because again, you both talked about the importance of leadership, senior leadership engagement and buy-in and support for the work that you're doing, and how has having a vision and strategy really sort of helped with that, I suppose. Question. Claire, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's absolutely paramount because it gives everybody a common language and it ticks the boxes for everybody's agendas. In cash-strapped environments, people tend to work in silos. That's not just in local authorities, it's everywhere. And when you can start to paint a picture and tell a story about why this is important, and you have hooks that you can hang other people's agendas on, so climate was an absolutely classic one for us. We had already established CN28 as a corporate priority. So, by using that and using that to leverage the rest of the strategy around, it just helped to tell the story, get people excited. We can talk about it excitedly ad infinitum, but it's important that you recognise other people's agendas and what they're trying to deliver. One of the questions that I just answered was around, how do you manage the balance between it being highly prized residential land and, your planning colleagues wanting to sell it because you need to release the capital, with the fact that your residents are wanting green space. Well, of course, it's a balance. But if you've got something that you can paint a picture, that describes the future that you want to create, it makes it it doesn't make it easier. It doesn't make it easy, but it makes it easier. I don't know if Eddie wants to add any more to that.
Yeah, I think Claire's hit it on the head, really. In many respects, it's just about trying to ensure that we are delivering on multiple agendas. Obviously, creating beautiful places is not just about buildings, it's also about the spaces in between. And the connectivity gets those people from one place to another place, and how they connect up to the parks and the green spaces and nature reserves. It's just a whole sort of systems approach to how we rethink our neighbourhoods and our estates. And I think actually the city centre in Nottingham was very much a cold place. You've lit practically no green space at all until the Green Heart been developed, and now everybody in our planning service, in our regen teams, are talking about how they can maximise those linkages and sort of maximise the benefits, running into all the different developments around the city centre. So I think it's what I think people are really buying into the agenda, and I think that's because one of our big corporate objectives is around CN28, the carbon reduction 28 strategy, which is not too far away now. So we're all trying to drive it as hard as we can. So I think that's been really useful.
Thank you. Maddie and Joe, do you want to say anything about that? About having a vision?
I'm waiting for Maddie to go first. I'll jump in. Yeah, I think it's obviously really important to have people at the top of the organisation who are actually making the decisions buy into what it is that you're trying to achieve. I think a large part of what gives politicians the confidence to put their name to these big ambitious projects is about the expectations of residents. So it goes both ways, and I think increasingly people are seeing public space as something beyond just a route from A to B, and something that can be achieving much more. And I feel like there's almost like a tipping point, as once you get a certain kind of proportion of projects that people are familiar with. When there's, you know, an opportunity to change a street, then the expectation is, well, you know, if you did that really great project over there, why can't you do it on my doorstep? And it feels like that's kind of the opportunity with nature cities, is that the expectation has changed across the board, and people want to see, you know, their streets looking more beautiful, and not least all of the, you know, the kind of climate resilience benefits that come with it. And I think people are more informed and just want to see this happen. So I think it kind of feeds into itself. But, you know, all of that aside, you definitely need a really strong policy that backs it all up. Otherwise, it's really hard to push for it, particularly in a planning context. So I think it all needs to be working side by side. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And I mean, there is a, Victoria, I was going to bring you in on this, because there is a question in the chat around, do you need a vision in order to make a fund application? And I think, I don't know whether you're able to say anything about that, and how the fund can help to deliver some of the benefits that we've seen through the presentations today.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that doing all the things that Joe and Maddie and Claire and Eddie have talked to us about today takes headspace, it takes time, whether that's creating the vision or building the partnerships or writing the strategy. So that's exactly what we've designed the Nature Towns and Cities capacity building grant for. It's to create that headspace and give you time and people, whether those are people you employ, or whether it's consultants that you need to bring in, or specialists to be able to do those things. So no, you don't have to have an existing vision. That's absolutely what you could use the funding for, to co-create a vision, to build your partnerships, to write strategies. But yeah, so absolutely, it's fine to say that's how you would spend the money if you were applying for a grant. And hopefully some of the examples today have proved some inspiration about some of the goals you might get to slightly further down the line.
And another a linked question, Victoria, is around, you know, the inclusion of towns and cities in that initiative, and that it's not just focused on big cities, looking at transformation of towns as well. Do you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, we've heard from cities today, but that's Nature Towns and Cities really does mean nature towns and cities. We're looking at the urban fabric more broadly than just big cities. So if you are a local authority or work in a town rather than a city, then this is still a fund for you. You might want to think about collaborating with your neighbouring towns or neighbouring authorities potentially, but it's not obligatory. But what we're interested in is solutions at scale. We're interested in for the capacity building grant in particular, creating that headspace, that capacity to enable you to write your strategies for your urban areas, to build the partnerships, to create the visions, to look at what the actual change on the ground needs to be, and to build that investment case and that investment pipeline. So it's not for single sites, but it is for towns. That's not to say we don't think there is sometimes an access issue in more rural areas. Just this is not the intervention. This is designed for the urban landscape.
Thank you, Victoria. We've got a question around whether any of the projects have sort of included or catalyzed others, like businesses, homeowners, to take their own sort of climate adaptation, mitigation, biodiversity measures. I would add to that. Has it been a catalyst for wider change? And I think maybe this links to some of the points we've had around sort of the community engagement that you've had, and you know, a lot of the driver actually for some of these initiatives, particularly in Nottingham, has come from that kind of groundswell. So yeah, just interested to hear your perspectives on that. Claire, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think through the stakeholder engagement that we did, there's without a doubt a number of people that have been involved in the process. What we're hoping going forward is that for each physical manifestation of the strategy that comes online, whether that's the Green Heart or a new paddling pool that we're currently restoring with support from Heritage Lottery, that we're able to talk about what Greener, Healthier, Happier Nottingham is. And that's the reason why, you know, it's perhaps not the most creative title, but it does what it says on the tin, and it means that it's easily accessible for everybody. So it probably was a bit more self-selecting initially, but going forward with each real project that comes online, we're able to talk about it more. And the whole point behind that is that you build a sense of value and a sense of shared ownership and a sense of importance. And something that Jo said really struck me about people's expectations. People want to know how they can help and how we can make it easy for them to be able to take action. And that is what I think all of these schemes and programs allow us to do, give people reasons to get involved and actions that they can actively be involved in. I don't know if Eddie wants to add to anything to that.
What I'd just say is that, you know, sometimes people power really does pay to listen to, and certainly, you know, the Green Heart is an absolute result of, you know, people really demanding some change in that environment, and you know, the communities in Nottingham who are, you know, generally, you know, quite green in their, you know, in their thinking, you know, really wanted to see something change, you know, and actually we could have just gone down the route of doing our normal 10% gain and just putting a little slither down the side of a footpath. But actually, we ended up with 438% biodiversity net gain on that site, rather than 10%, and that's the direct result of listening to our communities and what they wanted.
Do you, Jo or Maddie, do you want to say anything about that, around how, whether this has catalysed other businesses to do more in that sort of space?
Yeah, I think at Islington, we have seen a lot of interest in terms of sort of localized greening. People are very interested in kind of creating new green spaces on their streets or creating nature on their doorstep. We've been running a scheme called Islington Greener Together, where residents or local businesses can apply to have new green spaces kind of designed and delivered on their doorstep, and we build them and then the residents will maintain them. And as part of that, we have had quite a lot of applications from either businesses or collaborations between businesses and residents. We've got a few parklets in the borough, for example, that have been really successful in terms of those sorts of collaborations between local residents and businesses looking after a small parklet, providing sort of seating as well as planting, and just a sort of place to be that's green and it's on their doorstep. So I think the more of these projects that we start to deliver, the more that people see the change that's happening around them in the borough, the more it seems to catalyse the number of requests that we get, and we get more and more people sort of asking for these types of projects. So it definitely feels like there's a sort of there's a lot of movement in that area, and there's increasingly a lot more interest in these sort of very localised kind of pocket parks or smaller green spaces that people would like to have on their street.
And how much influence do you feel that the councillors you know, have been in terms of pushing this agenda forward?
Yeah, quite strong as well. Again, we have a lot of requests from councillors around asking about sort of the possibilities of developing new green spaces, often in collaboration with residents as well. And you know, they do push this agenda forward quite a lot. At Islington, we actually have a target for the amount of new green space that we have to deliver by 2030. So that's also helping to push it along. But I'd say that there's a huge role for councillors in terms of kind of forwarding the agenda on this, and making people aware that it's something that they can actually get involved with as well.
Brilliant. There's a couple of other questions in the chat, particularly around the funding side of things, Victoria. So just coming to you on these, should we be looking at the whole town or city rather than just connecting some of our green spaces? And is there a way to find out if you're signed up to be an H town? So yeah, a couple of questions for you.
So on whole town city, yes, we're looking for at scale interventions, so whole town city or a large part of. If you're if there's something the size of Birmingham, then something slightly smaller than that would also be fine. But yes, we're looking for big scale intervention, because we know that that's the scale of change that needs to happen. You know, we are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. There are a large percentage of people without access to green space close to home. So this is a big, ambitious programme, and we're looking for big, ambitious solutions that cover whole urban areas. And that's why we've also got this capacity building fund that goes alongside it, to enable you to radically rethink the green space in that area, and to produce the strategies, the plans, the investment cases, of the likes of which you've heard about today. Is there a way to find out if your town has signed up? Not yet, really, because so we've obviously got the expressions of interest open at the moment, but the other two aspects of the programme that are coming on stream soon, so the network, of which this is Taster, as Matilda said at the start, and the accreditation will be coming on stream in early 2025. So the best way to find out more about those things and who has signed up would be to join the mailing list, which you can do from the Nature Towns and Cities website.
Brilliant. Thank you, Victoria. I'm going to come with one last question, which is, what do you think has been the most significant barrier that you've had to overcome, and how you've done that? And it's going to have to be short. So I don't know which one of you wants to kind of jump in with a response to that. Is anyone give me a thumbs up to have going to have a crack at that? Yeah, Joe, go for it.
I think when talking about making changes in the highway, you have to acknowledge, it came up earlier, but the highway authority, they are the kind of the landowners, the custodians. They've done things in a particular way for a very long time, and I think it just can't be overemphasized enough that you need to bring those officers along with you on the journey, that this is about doing it collectively, and it's not about imposing. And when people don't want to see something happen and they put their feet down, then it's quite hard to move that. So I think just emphasizing the need to kind of do it as a group organization, and make sure that everybody's signed up to it.
Brilliant. Claire?
Two key things, really: competing priorities and lack of funding.
Yeah, and you've overcome those. You feel like you have been able to overcome those. Do you want to just say quickly how you did that, or what you feel like were the key lessons for you from that?
Yeah, I mean, the competing priorities, it's about having a shared vision and managing your stakeholders, and everybody buying into your ultimate aim and gain. And the second thing is about being creative. And both of the cities that we've heard from today have talked about how they've had to think quite creatively and jump into other people's potential funding streams in order to be able to reframe the outcome. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I need to wrap up now. So enormously in gratitude to the panel for your wisdom, inspiration, and just for sharing the experiences you've had over the last, well, it's been quite a significant journey, I think, for both local authorities. So I think we've benefited enormously from you sharing with us your journey, and thank you very much. And I'm going to hand back to Matilda now, just to give us some last minute final wrap up.
Great, thank you so much, Claire, and a huge thank you to you for chairing us through this session, and to all our panel members, of course. If you do have any other questions, please do get in touch with us directly. We'd love to hear from you. Before we close, I just wanted to very quickly remind you of the ways you can get involved now. So as well as the grant expression of interest being open until the 12th of November, you can provide sort of further thoughts and feedback via the interactive whiteboards, or by joining future webinars. And as mentioned by a few people now, our mailing list is also open, and you can sign up to that via our website. That's really the best place to ensure you get information as early as possible. So we've come to the end of the webinar. So all that's left for me to do is thank you all for joining. Thank you very much to our panel members and speakers once more. I hope you all have a lovely rest of the day. See you soon.